Hello Niclas, welcome for today. We would like to have a quick interview with you and we are very thankful for your time and patience to be with us. Would you start with introducing yourself, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot for having me. My name is Niclas Lehnert. I'm co-founder and CEO of Bavertis, and actually my professional and also academic career started here in Munich several years ago by doing first an apprenticeship at a bank and afterwards studying management at the LMU here. During this time, during my bachelor time, I moved for almost 1 year abroad during an Erasmus semester, and at this time I also switched from the banking to the consulting sector. And after coming back and finishing my bachelor studies, I moved on to the University of Tissot to again study management in a master. During this time, I stayed for 1 year at the University of Tissot and for 1 year at the University of Budapest, doing some kind of a double degree. And at this time, we actually started with what we are doing today, because that's where the time when I applied together with my old school friend for a public grant called Forschungstransfer. And this Forschungstransfer was actually the starting point for Bavertis.
Now I would like to focus more on your background and experience in entrepreneurship. So I would like to ask, have you always been interested in entrepreneurship, and did you have another attempt before succeeding in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I was always quite interested in doing something that is, let's say, independent, so not being so strictly focused on a given structure or on a given hierarchy, if you want it like this. So even during school I was always seeking for little jobs I could do and trying different things out. And even during my professional career in the banking sector, I noticed quite fast that this is a good base you could create with this in having an apprenticeship and first professional experience, but this was nothing I could imagine to do for the long term. So in general, there was always the idea to build something on my own, and then the big question is how and with who. And then the coincidence happened when, and that's not a joke actually and not a made up story, I met an old school friend during Christmas, and together had a beer and we were talking what we would do with our life, because he was finishing his dissertation, I was finishing my master's studies, and he told me about the idea and the content of his dissertation and was asking me if I would be up to apply for a public grant to try this out in a more industrial context, the technology, and in the best case we would aim for building a startup from it, and I was in for it, and that was how I started my experience and my journey as an entrepreneur.
Could you also introduce your teammates and tell a bit more about the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So one I mentioned already, who is Dr. Manuel Kuda. He wrote his dissertation on our technology, so he's in the end the idea giver of the whole concept and the whole technology behind Bavertis. I know him already from school time, so roughly I would say 15 to 20 years already, which is quite good, because when you know a person quite well, then it's always easier to work together without any surprises, let's say. And so that's the first other founder, and then there's two more founders in the team. The first one is Michael Honegger. He is taking over the responsibility for the software development part. Before he joined Bavertis, he was working at Rohde & Schwarz, which is also a big tech company, and was always focusing on software, a very specific part of software, because we need embedded software that is very closely connected to hardware, which is kind of a rare software development process. So we are super happy to acquire Michi to this part. And the fourth member is Niclas Lehnert, who's taking care of the hardware development. He was previously, before he joined Bavertis, head of hardware at Kinexon. Kinexon is, since last year, no longer really a startup. They raised a 3-digit million round in a Series A, I think. But still, we could convince him to join Bavertis and basically start again a new startup journey with his own startup, because he was working as a working student at Kinexon and then further developed to the head of hardware. So we are super happy to also have him in the team.
And would you please tell us more about Bavertis? So what are you doing? What is this startup exactly for?
In one sentence, we are developing a combination of software and hardware prolong the lifetime of battery packs for electric vehicles and making it easier to include those electric vehicles into either the public grid or also your home grid supply. And going a bit more into detail, the conventional setup of electric cars is always kind of like this, that you have on one side to charge your battery, an onboard charger, then in the next step to have an idea of how full or empty the battery is with the battery management system, and then to really power your motor with the power that is stored in the battery, you also need an inverter. And the point why you have such a kind of complex system is that the battery itself is always a DC system. So it can only be charged with DC, and it can only be powering a DC system. And as our public grid, or the charging grid, is most of the time an AC grid, and also the motor wants an AC signal to be powered, there needs to be those interfaces. And we had a closer look at this and had the idea that it should be actually possible to miniaturize all those three components, so the charger, the inverter, and also the battery management, into a very small electric component and include this into the battery. And that's actually what Bavertis is doing. We are combining the functionalities of the onboard charger, the battery management, and also the inverter, making it small and putting it into the battery pack. And that has the very nice advantage that the system itself is not only cheaper than the conventional systems, but also we are able to prolong the lifetime of those battery packs by up to 80%. And this is a very important point because when you have a look at the battery pack, this is always the most cost intense, most resource intense, and also the most CO2 intense part of every electric vehicle when you have a look at the production process. And when we talk about the lifetime of those battery packs at the moment with conventional systems, then we are talking about lifetimes of roughly 10 years. And comparing those 10 years with the resource and energy input and also CO2 output on the other side, compared to the very short use time, then this is not a very good trade-off. And we need to work on prolonging the lifetime of those battery packs and keeping them in use as long and as efficient as possible, and that's exactly what Bavertis is working on.
I would like to focus on some points that you mentioned. So you mentioned the efficiency and the emissions. So let's focus on more the sustainability side. So what do you think this technology brings us so that we have a more sustainable future?
In the end, what we can do in a bigger scope with this technology is building a data-driven battery ecosystem, because when we implement the Bavertis system in the very first place into the electric cars, then in the first step we have a lifetime prolongation, meaning that we can keep the battery packs longer in use in a mobility application. But then in the second step, when we talk about a used up battery pack for mobility, this does not necessarily mean that you can't use those batteries at all anymore. But there is always, or most of the time, the possibility to put those battery packs into a second life, so putting them away from a mobility application to, for example, a stationary application, a wind or a solar power plant, where the energy is stored and then on demand put into the grid. And for those applications, such a battery pack that might be used up for the mobility space can still be used in such a stationary application. And with our system, we can simply do a software update to reuse the battery packs and then again prolong the lifetime and the use time of the battery packs. And then in the final step, as we can use and generate super high quality battery data, we have always a quite clear idea of what is left and for what we can still use the battery pack. And then at the very end of the life cycle, when we really have just like 10 or 15% of the capacity of the battery pack left, when we can really consider it as used up, then we can put them into the recycling process. But all the way before, from the first to the second, and maybe even the third or a fourth application, we can include our data and take it as base for making the decision in which application we can still use the battery pack, or if we maybe really can recycle it because it's really used up.
what were the biggest challenges you faced and you would like to share so that it inspires other people?
Yeah. There is always plenty of technical challenges, but I'm not going too deep into that because actually I'm not working on them mainly, and they are not very general, they are very specifically for every startup depending on what you're doing. But there is plenty of general challenges who is basically everyone facing, and one of them is building a structure around the mess when you start, because there's like billions of different topics you need to cover, especially at the beginning. Even if it's just like looking for a lawyer and working on contracts and looking for other team members. So there's like really wide variety of different topics you need to cover. And that is at the very beginning a challenge to really focus and prioritize which ones of them are really worth working and investing time on it. Because that's the second challenge, that you're always super limited in time. You could basically work 24 hours a day and you would still have a huge pile of work to do. So it's super important to know what to focus on and to make the experience and like have an idea what is important and what's not important, so that you can like manage your time basically. And the third point, which is always a pain point for startups, is funding, of course, because the idea is good, having people is better, but these people need to be financed somehow, because even if you have the greatest idea, you need to live off something. And financing is like the third big challenge for every startup, but be positive, because there's always a way to find money and to move on. Even if it's not always the classical venture capital case, there is so many more sources you can fund your startup from, especially in the very early stages, that the VC case is not necessarily the one you totally rely on. So there is always a different option and another option to find your financing.
And in which stage are you in right now as Bavertis and as your team? And what do you plan to have in the future?
Yeah, so when we have looked at it from the funding perspective, then I would say we are in between the pre-seed and the seed phase. When we have a more technological view on it, then we are on the technology readiness level 5. Now, in the next 1 to 2 years, working on reaching technology readiness level 7 to 9. So we're still in the development phase for the product itself, but now entering the phase where we are no longer in the lab and trying it out on the lab stage, but now moving one step further and evaluating the technology together with an industrial partner in a real world environment, because that's always the next step, and that's what we're working on at the moment.
So in your learning pattern, let's say, is there something that you would do better if you had a second chance?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to fundraising, because last year when we decided that it's not time to fundraise, we were totally not ready for it, and we were not aware of how to do it, who to approach, who's the right investor, how to talk to them, even how to meet them, and also how to manage them, like in a relationship context. So this is something where you need to have a very clear structure and a very clear idea about in which stage you are and which investor is the right one for this stage. This is something we did not very well, to be honest, and that's something I would hopefully do better if I had a second chance.
So you said it's a lot of time and it is sometimes failure, or it's very hard to keep up with. Did you have any supporters that are like professors or some partnerships or your family members that helped you through? So maybe you could give some examples from your experience.
Yeah, we had one professor that supported us a lot, who is Rafaela Kraus from the University of Forced Arms here in Munich. She's also the vice president who like pushed us a bit into the direction of funding. And she, in the first place, like in the very early stage and the first phase, basically, she supported us with networking, with feedback on like various topics, because it's always important to have someone who's giving you an external perspective on what you're doing. You're quite fast going into your kind of own world, and it's always important to sometimes ask someone else who has like an external perspective to give you feedback on something. And that was in the very first place Raffaello, who was supporting us. And then later, when we moved on, also we had mentors who helped us on like very specific topics, let's say, where it's not so important to have like a general opinion or feedback on it, but for example, when it comes to legal stuff, that someone really has the technical background or the knowledge to give you an advice and saying, okay, this term in the term sheet, for example, might be not the best one, you could phrase it like this or like that, and then make a new offer in a new round of negotiation. So that was also an important part of support we got from the mentor side.
Did you also have emotional support from your family and of course your friends?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I would say, one of the most important things, to have someone like in your private space especially you can talk to and share when you failed on some points, and you will fail for sure. That's like something that is given in being an entrepreneur, that there will always be failure. And then it's important to have someone who can kind of relate to the problem and you can talk to and kind of see and get some feedback how to maybe move on the topic or how to tackle it again from another perspective. So I would say friends who are maybe also kind of related to the entrepreneurship world is important, because they kind of face the same problems. So sometimes they have a solution for you. But on the other hand, it's also important to have someone who's like totally disconnected from the world of entrepreneurship, who you can simply like give the failures and he's just listening and kind of nodding that you got rid of it and that you could just talk about it and to get it off your mind and to kind of clean your mind. This is also important, and that's sometimes easier for a person to take on if they are not really related to the entrepreneurship world.
What attributes do you think is most important for being an entrepreneur or to be successful in entrepreneurship?
The first one I would like to mention is resilience, because as you're failing many times, for sure, it's always important to not being distracted by this personally, but still taking the learnings from it, but then continue. So never giving up on it because you failed. This is a very important attitude you need to have as a founder, because there will be many situations where you will fail or where you will not succeed. So taking the learnings from this, which is also super important, and making it better the next time, that's a very important thing you need to have in your mindset as a founder. And the second very important thing is that you are willing to learn on a daily basis, because you cannot expect that if you studied management that you will only be related to management stuff, or if you study tech that you only will be related to tech stuff. There will almost every day be a task where your background is not the right one for, but you still need to work on it and you still need to find a solution for it. And especially in the early stage, you do not have the money and not the capacity to pay someone for it who's a specialist in it to do it. So you need to do it on your own. And that's also a very important thing you have to have in your mind as a founder, that you're willing and open to learn and work on new stuff you're not really related to.
And as a last remark, what would you give, what tips or suggestions would you give to the fellow students that are planning or dreaming of being an entrepreneur? Do you have any important remarks for them?
Absolutely. If you say maybe, maybe is never. So simply start doing it. If you have a rough idea, if you have a rough team, then simply try it. Because there can basically nothing can go wrong. So in the worst case, you gather the experience, but that's still so much more than someone gained who never tried, that it's always worth a try. So simply, if you have an idea, then start doing it, trying it out, and do your best, and you will succeed.
So let's say we also wish them good luck, and if they start, I hope they will be also successful, like Bavertis. And that would be all from our side. Thank you for your time and for you being open to us and trying to inspire also the future generation, let's say. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot for having me, and hopefully see you next time.